Hello, you asked me how I would fix this painting. I wouldn't look at it as fixing exactly. I would look at it as my advice on improving it and in general how to think about a landscape painting, not how to paint it, but how to think and go about it. Since I received my academic art training in painting and design, I will approach evaluating this painting from this standpoint. Most of plein air artists are already familiar with 8 basic principles you need to follow: style, composition, design, linear and atmospheric perspective, values, color harmony, light effect, and edges. Obviously, if this particular artist understood fully all 8 of these principles, we wouldn't be improving this work. The first principle, style, in this case plein air, more like plein air study, is important to establish from the beginning because there are certain expectations that come with plein air studies that are done on location. The next big thing is composition. In this work, composition is not very certain. That's a major contributor to why this work could be and should be improved. Composition cannot be improved without incorporating design and values. That is because all 3 are contributors to the main composition. Composition is a balance of main shapes in the work. Design is like the building blocks within those shapes. Values, or light and dark shapes, are also design elements in balance of light to dark. The 5th principle, color, needs to be ignored at this point. It is too seductive and distracting. We can't and shouldn't forget about color, but values are much more important, especially in the beginning when the work is developing. Here I removed all color and am left with values, building blocks, and main shapes. Now I can evaluate the composition better. You can see how bland everything looks, and the only things that stand out are the clouds and the cloud reflections. I am also going to zoom out to see how the main shapes are reading from way back. This is the equivalent of stepping way back from your painting and evaluating it from the distance. This is one of the reasons why plein air painters ideally should be painting standing up. That is, the ease of stepping back and looking at your work from the distance saves you a lot of trouble later. The problem with the values becomes more apparent when I extracted the values from various shapes within the painting, isolated them against the black background, and compared them to each other. You do see the contrasts between light and dark values, but the light values are all about the same, and the dark values are all about the same as well. And yet they come from different objects, from trees, from water, from reflection. This is not right. We should be able to easily tell which value belongs to which object because different objects reflect and absorb light differently. Therefore, the values will look different as well. In this work, it is not easy. If I didn't draw those connecting lines, you would be hard-pressed to figure out which value came from where. A successful work will capture the values not only correctly, but in the right proportion to each other, in the right amounts of light to darks. For centuries now, from the masters to today's designers, artists follow a certain formula. They follow it loosely, not super precisely, but nonetheless, most successful works conform to this formula. There are 4 basic tonal plans. Get your work fit into one of those and you can't miss. It seems to fit better with the 3rd plan, but it also becomes obvious what the improvements should be. The darks need to be darker, the lighter gray and darker gray need to be more visible. Right now they're too close together, and the whites are just fine. I will keep this in mind as I start to dissect the composition. The composition seems to have stripes coming through it. That's the very beginning steps. Those stripes seem to be forming three almost equal sections in the painting. The main shapes that are very easily visible in the painting seem to be all pulling in one direction toward the reflection of that bush, where the horizon line comes to as well. So since it feels like it's pulling that way, it's a kind of movement. Then I'm noticing a balance building up between the bush and its reflection and the rocks in the lower right. It is echoed by the reflections in the distant shore. Another aspect of the composition that I feel like could happen is sort of like a sunshine composition, except here it's the darker shape of the tree and its reflection, with the other value and shapes emanating from it, but encountering other objects. Looking at it this way, I'm trying to figure out what the artist was sensing and tending toward, what was attracting him or her to the scene. Since the composition is still not very certain, I'm going to abstract all the main shapes and see what else I can pick up on. And it feels pretty bouncy all over the place. You do feel like you can bounce from rock to rock, but where all the lines seem to lead you is right off the painting. That means that things need to be moved around slightly. Here's a more precise abstraction of the work. It will help us see what to darken, what to lighten, and what shapes to change. Here's where I darkened some values and I changed a little bit of the water. I deducted that there are some reeds on the right side above the rock, so I put that indication in. I also improved a little bit of the shape of the reflection just to suit the composition better and expand the water area because we need a little bit more of that value for our design. The massive rock that is almost in the center lower third of the painting had to be downsized, only shaved off on the right side and left alone on its left side. That is because compositionally it kept getting in the way. If you see previous diagrams, you will see how it is a bit in the way, being so massive and drawing so much attention to itself. Now that the values are much better, we can cool down the shadows a bit and introduce a little better color harmony to the work. Cooling off shadows makes the light much warmer. Previously, the work looked warm and brownish overall, except for that blue water. Now there is a greater variety between cool and warm colors. And this way we achieve better feeling of warm sunlight by using the proper values and within those values playing with cooler colors. At the same time, the aerial perspective is also improved by darkening the values, for example, those darker shadows under the rocks that bring them forward into the foreground and solidify them here, and a distant darker tree and its reflection are slightly lighter in values. The linear perspective here is felt not so much by the objects receding and getting smaller in size as they approach that horizon line, but because of the design. Design elements can make it feel like there is a linear perspective, however irregularly it may be shaped. With all the lines that I drew over objects, you see how all of them want to converge in that one point on the horizon or the eye level of the artist. When I changed the shapes of the cloud reflections, I didn't change it this way for no reason. I added that horizontal rhythm to the water. Clouds in the reflections are design elements, and having them flow in the right direction, being shaped a certain way, always helps with the design. Previously, these cloud reflections conformed to more of the vertical and diagonal directions. Now they conform to more horizontal with a little bit of a diagonal flow and help us feel the flatness of the surface of the water. While I did not position them in such a way that would show the linear perspective, they're not getting closer and closer together as they get closer to the horizon. They just plain introduce the rhythm that helps us feel the ripple effect over the water. And ripple means movement, and all the other lines draw us toward that tree, its reflection, and the shore converging at that one point, and that tells us that this is where everything is moving. This is where we would want to move if we were standing right there on the scene. We would hop from rock to rock, float with the cloud reflections toward that one point, and discover what is there beyond that tree. Since all the lines are pointing in that direction, even the cloud and the sky, then something worthy of discovering is there. And in this slightly different diagram, you can see that the tree and its reflection are nicely counterbalanced by the rocks. The big boulder that I downsized is no longer getting in the way, but is helping with that balance and connection. The distant shore and its reflections are also helping in the counterbalance in the composition on the upper right. The cloud reflections in the big cloud in the sky are now creating a nice rhythm. The cloud in the sky being bright point, bright spot, and the cloud reflections are echoing it in the flatness of the water. But what can we call this composition? You can compare what it looked previously and what it looks now. The underlining structure is stripes, but that's not all. There is a somewhat circular composition building because of the surrounding rocks, shore, its reflections, and the water in the middle. But would it be called the classic circular composition? I don't think so, because the point to which everything goes to, all the movement goes to that one point, is outside of the circle. But it doesn't mean that it's breaking any rules or it's non-conformist. It just means that there is a greater variety you can do with compositions. You can overlap several if it suits the landscape you're painting. I wouldn't call it breaking the rules, I would call it being very creative with the rules, because the main rule is to find balance, harmony, and unity in the work. Based on that diagram, I went back to the painting and with the Photoshop program made the same improvements as in the simplified diagram. You can see that the painting hasn't changed much. I haven't moved any major shapes around. It is the same idea as the artist had in mind, pretty much, just with slight improvements. That means that I try to preserve what the artist saw as much as possible, only improving on the technical aspects of the composition, colors, values, and so on. You have to understand that I'm evaluating this painting based only on the painting. I did not see the photo of this view. I did not stand there. I did not look at the clouds and how they are reflecting in the water. I did not double check the shapes of the rocks and so on. So I'm trusting the artist captured enough of the scenery right according to what he or she were seeing, and based on that I'm looking for what I'm seeing in the painting and how it can be improved. Could the clouds reflections be different? Sure. Maybe the rocks were not quite shaped the same way. Maybe the reflections did not extend the same way. I cannot know because I was not there. All I'm going is by my experience of painting on locations, how things work, but mainly what makes this painting better from the standpoint of composition. Now let's compare the newly Photoshopped version of the work in values only setting to its original. Does it feel like it improved? I think so. The rocks come forward more, everything in the distance seems to recede, the reflections have felt really well, and the cloud is the brightest spot in the painting. Now how would that compare to the 4 basic tonal plans? You can see that the darkest grays are taking up majority of the space in the composition of this painting. The darkest darks are but little accents here and there, take up the least amount of space. The lighter grays are taking the second largest amount of space in the composition, and the brightest whites are taking the third spot after lighter grays and after darkest grays. So the balance between light and darkness, lightest whites and darkest darks is captured really nicely. I hope now you can see how the values are really inseparable from composition and design. Now let's take a look at the edges. One thing that the artist did really well in this painting is the edges. It's a lot of loose brushwork, nothing is super precise, but the precision of values would improve it. It would tighten it up. So this loose brushwork can absolutely stay. It doesn't have to change. What does need to change is its approach to values and slightly cooler colors in the shadows. These are the basic improvements to this work, based strictly off of the original work. Since I haven't been on location, I haven't seen this view, I cannot improve on it any further. I hope you get my point. It is not how to paint or what to paint, not what rules to use and which ones to break, not what composition to use. It is about how to think about what you're looking at, how to understand it, and portray it most effectively. Plein air painting is not an easy task. This artist obviously loves nature and loves painting. Otherwise, he or she wouldn't be sitting out there exposed to the elements for a couple of hours. And I know no better way to portray this love but through interesting design, balance among shapes, harmony with colors and values. That is the very essence of love. I'm Elena Roche. Thank you for watching and asking questions.